Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Don Jones. I'm head of developer skills for Pluralsight, and I'm joined today by Jessica Schneider, who is with Develop Intelligence, a Pluralsight company that focuses on extremely personalized instructor-led training programs. We are here today to talk about insourcing. Jessica, I'm going to let you pop your slide deck up and take it away. And I guess the first thing we should cover is, we're hearing this insourcing word a lot. What's it mean? And what brought us here? How did we get here? What's it doing?
Sorry, I was mute. What a way to start a webinar, right? As on mute. That's great. Thank you. Let's get started. So let's start with a couple of definitions because I think that's always a really good place to start. When we say insourcing, what we mean is seeking talent from within your organization. So you're actually looking inside your organization to find talent to fill roles. That's in contrast to looking outside the organization with recruiting and other types of sourcing mechanisms. Insourcing talent means that you probably have to have some training programs internally, and those can be done either through reskilling or upskilling. Those are terms that we hear quite a bit. So reskilling is when you take someone from one set of skills and transition them to a completely different set of skills to be in a completely different role. Typically, those programs last over an extended period of time and cover a lot of different topics. Upskilling is when you have someone who has a skill set and you build on that skill set, either by introducing more advanced topics or complementary topics. So upskilling is they're keeping the skills they know and have been practicing, they're just learning it to a little bit more depth. So today we're really going to focus on reskilling programs.
Okay. I guess real quick, just to set the stage, what are some of the areas of IT that you're commonly seeing targeted for this type of action?
So typically, we are seeing reskilling programs being offered in areas of technology where people can grow. So we'll see employees being turned from, into data scientists or machine learning experts. Sometimes you're reskilling for the purposes of incorporating DevOps in your organization, or maybe if you're moving to the cloud. Those are areas that we're really seeing a big target in reskilling.
Okay. So let's talk about some of these business drivers then. What's really creating the momentum here?
Sure. So there's quite a few of them. You might have one in your organization that's not listed here, but these are the ones that we see most commonly. First of all, I think we've all seen the statistics, especially over the last year. There is really a shortage in our technical talent pool. There is a huge need for developers as companies are starting to embrace, the digital future and starting to move online. They really need developers to help them do that. And so there's a huge shortage in that talent. A pretty limited talent pool there. So reskilling programs, especially on the technical variety, are a great way to, reskill people in areas of the business that aren't traditionally technical and moving them into those technical roles so that you don't have to go outside the organization. When you do that, you hold on to employees who have really valuable institutional knowledge, right? So you can retain that. Somebody who's been at the organization for a long period of time, understand the processes, they know where the documentation is kept, they know who to go to ask questions, they know the history of projects and why they succeeded or why they failed. So they have a huge amount of value that they bring to those technical teams just because they've been in the organization for a long time, as opposed to someone who's joining new who might not know those things. So that's another really strong driver is holding on to that knowledge. We all know that unfortunately, as business changes, as the world changes, companies have to react. Sometimes that means that you have to automate processes, and sometimes that means you have to reduce your workforce. Companies never like to see people leave the organization. So having a reskilling program allows you to give those employees who might otherwise be let go an opportunity to try a new career or to try something different in the organization. So it's a great way to offset some of those forced reductions and give people a new career path, which is great. And then finally, because of the tech talent shortage and because there's so much competition right now for employees, people sort of have their pick of organizations that they want to work for. Having reskilling programs and being a company that's known for insourcing talent is a really effective recruiting tool. It gives the people who are trying to find people from outside the company a really good reason to bring people in, right? Because if you join the company and you know that there's opportunity to move and grow and try things, not only in your career path, but in other career paths, it's a great attractor for the company. So it's a great way to introduce new talent into the organization as well.
So some of the employees that you're going to be insourcing into say software development or other IT roles are going to come from non-technical backgrounds.
Yep.
Like what types of roles might you look at as a source for people? And then what are some of the other benefits in taking them out of that non-technical role and moving them into a technical role?
Yeah, so we've seen this concept around reskilling non-technical talent being really popular right now. That's something that a lot of organizations are looking at. It's a really great way to feed their development teams by bringing people from within the organization onto their technical teams. So, there are companies who are bringing cashiers from a retail environment into their technical teams, and folks in claims processing for insurance companies, or maybe customer service representatives, maybe people in finance, maybe even people in marketing. Anybody who's sitting in the business who isn't traditionally in a technical role is a great candidate to be pulled into those technical environments. And there's a few different reasons why. One is when you've got someone who is in the business and who's interacting with either your external clients or internal stakeholders, they have a really unique perspective. Think about a claims processor, right? They're dealing with customers every day who are trying to get their claims settled. They're also negotiating with internal stakeholders and internal companies, right? Trying to get those things resolved. They have a really unique view of how the business works and how the business is perceived from a lot of different groups. When you take that knowledge and that perspective and you put it into a development team, you get that knowledge and that perspective infused into the code and into the products and services you produce. So it goes beyond just looking at those employees as part of your requirements gathering process. You're really bringing them into the build process, which is a really valuable thing. So it's a great way to introduce some of that perspective. The other thing is that you're really sort of cross-pollinating your technical teams, right? So traditionally, I think development teams have been, developers who, have gotten a computer science degree and they've been developers, and maybe they've been developers in a lot of different organizations and seen a lot of things, but they're still developers, right? And they've been developers for a long time. Well, when you bring in employees who don't have that technical background, you're bringing in completely different perspectives. You're bringing in different, diversity of thought and skill set. And it's a great way to really sort of, create a more collaboration and more diversity within those tech teams. So pulling non-tech talent and pulling their experience and some of their interactions is a great way to really kind of bolster your development teams.
So let's just go straight for the hard question. What's this take? How long does it take? Like what's the actual, planning a program like this? What's that look like?
Yeah, well, it's not easy. I'll just start there. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It's not easy, but it's a very rewarding process. So I will say that. It can be intimidating, right? There's a lot of steps to follow. So I like to say, start with 3 basic steps. And if you do these 3 things, I think you're gonna find the path a little bit easier. So first, I always like to say, start with the end in mind. Think about what these developers, right? You're looking at a reskilling program, you're pulling from non-technical talent, you want to turn them into developers. What is it that the business needs these developers to do when they come out of this program? What are the specific tasks that they're going to be expected to do on their own? If you start there, right? If you interview managers, if you interview tech leads and development team members and get a really good sense of what they need to learn and be able to do, that's going to enable you to create a really strong technical program to make sure that when those students graduate, they can actually enter those jobs with confidence. So start with, what's the end goal, and then work backwards and build that program to really meet those needs of the business. The second thing, and I think where people tend to fall down a little bit, is in the recruiting and selection process. So a lot of people focus on the curriculum and the courseware, which is great. You need that, but you also need students to actually take that class. So you have to really think about how you're going to recruit and select these attendees to join this program. It's a really important piece. It can sometimes take the longest amount of time to do. So you want to make sure you're really planning for that well. Also, you want to make sure that you know where students are going to go when they graduate. If they go through this program and they come out the other side and there's no job for them, or they don't really have a strong direction about how they're going to use these new skills, they tend to lose motivation. So you want to make sure that you know how you're going to find them, how you're going to vet them, and then where they're going to go when they graduate so they can really put those skills to use. And then finally, and I think probably most importantly, is to find a leader in the business that can be your champion. Find someone who is as passionate about this program as you are, and partner up with that person to really help you navigate the organization to get the program implemented. Your champion can help you remove barriers. They can help you design the program. They can help recruit, support both during the planning process and once you're executing the program. So having someone in the organization that is by your side, that's your partner to really help you push through and execute is a really important thing, and something that I recommend strongly.
Yeah, so that's a big deal. It does take a lot of leadership. I know we have a couple of customers with Pluralsight who have programs like this, and they've been doing it for a while, and they've gotten good enough as leaders that they're able to kind of run these programs as a just-in-time delivery and put people into projects as they're spinning them up. Like, they've made this a part of the business, and
Yep.
I think that really is what it takes. Is it has to be part of the business.
Absolutely. It has to be, it has to be recognized by the organization as a key contributor to some of the strategic objectives as well, right? It has to be looked at as a project that's really beneficial to the organization. So agreed 100%.
So when you're looking at the type of people that you might recruit into a program like this, what are some criteria to think of? Like, you want to pick people who are likely to be successful. So what does somebody kind of need in order to be likely to be successful?
So we look for aptitude around ability to problem solve logically. We look for people who are really who are sort of not technical necessarily, right? You don't need to be technical to start to join a program like this, but it's important that you approach problems a certain way. It's important that you have a natural curiosity. It's important that you are interested in how things work and how to build things, right? Those are some of the characteristics that we're really looking for. And the benefit of some of these programs is that they can really make this shine through, right? So as you're selecting your candidates, you're really evaluating who are the people who are going to do well in this developer role. And the program itself is really going to help that. And so I like to think about these programs as being sort of multi-layered. The top layer is really the technology, right? That's the most important point. You're trying to communicate some of this technical information to the students. So the technologies that you choose are really going to be dependent on what the business needs. Your program may be a little bit more focused on the front end. It might be focused on the back end, right? So the technologies that you choose, the number of technologies, the length of the program, the depth of the content is going to be dictated by what that student is expected to do at the end. So the technical program is important, but just as important is that layer just beneath the surface, which is really designed to teach people how to be a programmer, how to be a developer. It's a completely different skill set. Someone who is working in retail, or someone who's working in a call center, they have a much different way of working. It's a different environment than being on a development team. So it's important that these programs really train to that. And somebody with an aptitude to take on some of these characteristics is really going to thrive in this environment. So throughout the programs, right, you are teaching people how to solve problems, how to collaborate, how to research technical challenges. They're learning software development practices like Agile. What does it mean to be on a stand-up meeting? What does it mean to iterate? And what is a sprint? They're learning the importance of quality and testing, and they're learning how to break down silos between engineering and operations, right, to create more of that collaboration and cohesion between teams. So this layer of sort of the being a developer is a really important aspect to the program, and is a really important piece. And those are some of the skills that I think it's important that you look for in some of the candidates that are applying.
Let's take a quick audience question because it's kind of timely. So that's kind of what you think of for candidates. What about those champions you mentioned? How do you identify those? How do you recruit them?
So that's a great question. I think that you want to find someone who understands, first of all, the value of the program, right? So someone who doesn't necessarily have to be in the technical team. It doesn't have to be somebody in HR even. It can be someone in the business who understands the value of recruiting people from outside of the technical organization and bringing them in. So somebody who has the same passion, someone who has great relationships across the business, who is maybe looked at as an influencer or someone who can, move projects through, someone who's known and has a reputation for getting things done, who can really help you break down barriers, because that is going to be the most important part. You're going to have to negotiate with a lot of different stakeholders. Typically, there's a lot of teams that are involved in this. So finding someone who has a knack for working with a lot of different departments, someone who is used to working cross-functionally and collaborating, that's a really important quality in this champion, because they're going to help you with things that you didn't even know that you needed help with, right? And they're going to be able to help you navigate the organization and find the people to pull into the project that are going to help you get it done.
So if a company is looking to do this, so they want to build an insourcing program, what are some of the key elements that you would typically see included in a program that winds up being successful?
So I think that a program like this, which is typically very long, has to include some things that appeal to a pretty wide variety, right? These programs typically last a while, and they typically attract people with a lot of different learning needs. So you have to make the program a little bit diverse. So first, we say that if you are teaching someone a completely new skill set, the best way to learn that is in that immersive environment. Making sure that somebody can enter the program on day one, go completely uninterrupted through the program and graduate at the end and enter that new role. So that means, every single day, 9 to 5, they're in that program, they're learning. That's the best way to learn that new skill set. It's uninterrupted time. They're working with their classmates, they're working with their instructor, they're completely immersed in that learning, and that's going to give them a really great foundation. So immersive is the best way to do it. Also combining a lot of different learning strategies. Everybody learns differently. Some people need to see it, some people need to hear it, some people need to do it. And nobody is the same, and everybody has varying degrees of those things in them, right? So you want to create a program that has a lot of different learning strategies and techniques so that everybody has a chance to shine in different ways. So we don't recommend that it's all self-paced or that it's all instructor-led, and we don't recommend that it's all lecture, right? You want to have a mixture of online content, you want to have a mixture of instructor content, you want to make sure that there's a good balance of lecture to lab time. You want to make sure that you're using exams and tests. Even though people hate that, it's a really great way to measure knowledge and see maybe where you need to shore up a bit. So having a lot of different learning strategies is a really great way to make sure that everybody is as successful as they can be. We also talk about relevant examples. Sometimes a training environment uses something like, building a lemonade stand, which is great if you're in the business of selling lemonade stands, but not many of us are. So when you create a training project where students have to connect from what the training project is to what they're going to be doing in their actual day-to-day, you're just creating another step in the process. So we recommend using use cases from within the business, use real projects, use backlog projects, use bug scenarios, right, to help train so that there's an immediate connection between what they're doing in training and what they're going to be doing day-to-day. That's also going to help prepare them to enter that job and know exactly what to do. And then finally, and I think pretty important, is having post-program learning and resources available to people. The learning doesn't stop when they come out of this program, right? In fact, I would argue that it's just beginning. So making sure that there are resources that these students have that they can go to. Maybe it's some online training, maybe it's mentoring, maybe it's time with the instructor after class to ask questions. Maybe it's projects or articles. Having some resources that students can use when they're done to go back and refresh and ask questions and learn more is a really important way to help them continue that journey of learning throughout their career.
So let's talk about the top of that pipeline, the people that you bring into this. Mm-hmm. How do you pick? You talked a bit about you want people who are curious, you want people who've got some aptitude, but how do you actually do that? Like, how do you measure that? How do you find those internal candidates? What's the recruiting kind of look like? What's the evaluation look like? I mean, it seems like this is kind of your first step towards success.
That's right. That's right. Especially in your first pilot program, you want to make sure that you choose the right candidates for this. You want to increase that graduation rate. You want to make it a great experience. So choosing the right candidates is a really important part, especially when you're launching the inaugural, version of this program. So let's talk a little bit about recruiting. There's a lot of decisions that you're going to have to make about how you find folks, right? You can hold an open application, right? You can open it up to anybody in the organization. You could use manager referrals or a nomination process, or you could do a combination of both, right? There's a lot of different ways. So you have to decide, where do you want this candidate pool to come from, and how do you want to communicate it to everybody? So you got to get the applications in, right? We always recommend some sort of screening application as a starting point, right? And this is typically, tell us, who you are and where you're coming from, but also asking questions around why the program is of interest, right? Have you always wanted to be a developer? What's motivating you? What do you hope to accomplish? What's your goal long-term? Some of these types of questions can help you get to know the candidate up front and understand why it is that they're applying for the program, because it's a pretty big decision and it's a pretty big step, right? Abandoning a career or a job and kind of taking a leap of faith into something else, right? So getting a feel for what's sort of going on behind the scenes is really important. It's a great first way to get to know these candidates. And then there's a lot of tools that you can use to get some initial aptitude, right? There's technical assessments, right? How familiar, how comfortable are they with computers? Most people at this point think, oh, well, everybody can use a computer, but that's not necessarily the case. Not everybody's really comfortable. So getting a feel for technical aptitude. And then cognitive assessments too. There's a lot of tools out there to help you gauge how people solve problems, how people approach different scenarios, right? What their thought processes are, right? You can kind of break that down. And if you've got some baselines for what you're looking for, those types of assessments are a really great way to say, yes, this person looks like they'd be a good fit. Let's move on. Or, you know what, this person isn't quite there yet. Let's put them back to the side and keep moving. So those are great ways to kind of get a good feel in that recruiting process. In that second phase around evaluation, that's sort of a two-way street. It goes both ways. You're evaluating the candidate, but you also want to give the candidate an opportunity to evaluate the program as well. We've said this is a big decision. This is a move from one career to another. And you want to give candidates the ability to test some things out and see some of the content before they make this big commitment, so that they know what they're getting into. I think most people think they understand what a developer is and what they do on a day-to-day basis, but it might be totally different when you actually get into it. So you want to make sure you've given them that opportunity. So we like to say that you can assign some, maybe you're assigning some basic learning material. Maybe you do a little test to see how well they've retained that knowledge. Maybe you do a little exercise, right? You wouldn't expect them to produce code necessarily or to develop a web page, but giving them an opportunity to go through some content and then seeing how they've interpreted it, how they've internalized it and turned it into an end product is a great way for you to see how they do and for them to kind of test out, their approach and whether or not this is something they really want to do. So that evaluation phase is a really important part of the process as well. And then finally, in selection, right, when you're making your final selections, there are additional behavioral assessments you can do to really make sure that the candidates are going to fit within the team and they're going to have good dynamics. You can interview candidates. You'd never hire anybody without doing an interview, so we always recommend interviews, right? Interview with HR teams or with talent teams, interview with people on the engineering team. Really make sure that they get to know you and you get to know them. And then as you accept people into the program, I think it's important to think about allowing for a grace period. And what we mean by that is, at some point in the beginning of the program, there should be an opportunity for candidates to opt out and say, you know what, either this isn't what I thought it was, I don't want to do it anymore, or something in my life has changed and I just can't commit to it. Giving them some window where it's okay to leave the program is important for the decision process, right? So if you extend an offer into this program to an employee, but there's a lot of pressure to complete the program, that makes the decision a lot harder. So ease some of that pressure and give them an opportunity to say, you know what, there's a period at which, if you decide that you don't want to move forward, it's not a problem, you can leave the program. And that just makes it an easier decision for people to make. You don't want to have any added pressure as they're going through this process. So it's an important piece of making sure that you've got people who are really committed for the right reasons.
Yeah, because it already is a lot.
It is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, how do you measure success? What does success look like? And I'll add to that a bit. Do you have any companies that you can name, or even verticals that you can name that you think you've seen do this well?
I'll start with the measuring success, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the success stories. There's a lot of ways that you can measure success. Clearly, as you are implementing these programs internally, there's going to be a large group of stakeholders who are going to say, what's going to be the return and how are we going to know if it's working? So there's a couple of different ways you can evaluate the program itself, and then you can evaluate the participants. I'll start with participants because that tends to be a little bit easier. When we evaluate participant success, right, when we're looking at whether or not they graduate from the program, we like to use 3 different factors. One is knowledge retention, right? So we always incorporate some sort of exam or test to just make sure that they can, pass a test based on that knowledge. We use skills application, right? So there's typically multiple projects throughout the program that they're graded on, as well as usually a capstone project at the end of the program, which is a culmination of all the skills that they've learned. So they are getting code reviews, they are being graded on their ability to actually code and perform some tasks. And then we also look at behavior change, right? How was their behavior change throughout the program? Are they thinking like a programmer now that they've been in this program? Are they collaborative? Are they helping their team and answering questions? Are they asking lots of questions? That's a really important quality in a developer as they're entering the team. So typically we do some sort of metric based on those 3 things. Usually there's some quantitative scores and then some more qualitative, like, yes, I think this person has, met the right behaviors. So those are metrics that you can use on individuals. You can also use employee satisfaction, right? You can look at scores prior to entering the program and after entering the program. Typically, if you are publicizing these programs throughout the organization, employee satisfaction in general is going to go up, not just by the people who are impacted by the programs, but those who are actually seeing their peers move into different roles. And then looking at employee tenure in the engineering teams, typically developers like to be challenged and they move around a lot, but you want to hold on to those developers. You want to, make them part of your organization for a long time. So if you're training people within the business and turning them into engineers, you should see that tenure start to go up because you're holding on to those people a little bit longer, which can be a really great thing for the business. So those are really sort of on the participant side. On the program side, right, from a business perspective, understanding whether or not programs are working, graduation rate is a really great way to do that, right? How many people are actually graduating from the program based on who's entered? What's their time to productivity, right? When they graduate the program and they sit down in their roles, how long, how many days, weeks, months does it take them to commit production code? This is a really great way to start to, reduce that amount of learning time. And you can compare productivity rates of people who have gone through these reskilling programs with people who come into the organization, who are new grads coming in, right? So you can look at the difference of those programs and really see some differences in times, which is a really great thing. If you're looking internally and insourcing and pulling people out of roles and putting them into this program and then putting them into developer roles, you should see some of those recruiting and onboarding costs go down for those engineering roles, right? Because you're not having to go out and find people outside the organization. You don't have to onboard them if they've already been at the company, right? They've already got all their stuff, right? They know what to do. So you should see some of those costs go down. And then finally, looking at some of those engineering team contributions, right? The whole premise is based on pulling in different perspectives, having different thoughts around what's going to benefit the business. So I would expect that as your non-technical team members come into those teams, you're seeing different and new features that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before. Maybe you're seeing some ways to reduce operational costs. Maybe you're, creating and releasing products and services that are really impacting customer satisfaction. So I would expect some of those metrics to really improve as well, as they're contributing to the building of products and services within the business. So then you asked about examples, and I would say that we've got an insurance company who has been doing this now for a few years.
Wow.
And one of the triggers really was that they wanted to increase the number of women in their engineering teams. So they started this program, right? And they started looking for opportunities to promote women. And so they've pulled business analysts, and they've pulled people working in claim centers and people working in call centers, right? Employees who aren't traditionally technical, and they've put them through these programs. I think we're in our 6th cohort now of students.
Wow.
They have incredible results. They have 100% graduation rates. They have employees that are now sitting in those development teams that are really thriving and just loving their new careers. So it's been a great opportunity for the business to promote and grow people in roles that might not have that type of career path and put them into development roles. And it's causing, there's a lot of publicity within the company around it, and people see it, and people know, when they say they're a graduate of the program, people know that, and there's a little bit of a respect that goes with that. So that's
awesome.
been a great thing for their organization. Yeah.
There's a pitch that we use when we're talking to tech leaders a lot of times, and it goes something like, everyone tells us now that every company is a tech company, right? If you're not succeeding at tech, then your business is probably in danger. And that kind of means every company has to be a learning company, because there's no way to really be successful in tech without being confident in your ability to lead to learning. And when you are confident that you can lead to learning, when you can build skills the way you're talking about, you can start to hire for things that you can't build, like diversity. Knowing that I don't have to hire the skills, I can build those. I can start to get a little more creative around other goals and priorities. So that's a great story to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, it's not all roses and sunshine in business. So what are some of the risks around these programs? What are some of the difficulties? What are some of the speed bumps, and how can organizations think about mitigating those up front?
Yeah. And you're right. It's not all good things, but I think knowing the challenges as you're entering the program is just going to help you be prepared for them. And then they don't become challenges anymore. So this is a good thing.
This is all what leadership's about, right?
Right. Anticipating, right? You're never going to know everything, but you got to know as much as you can before you get started. So the first thing I would say, probably the biggest challenge, is time allocation. These are not quick programs. They are not programs that are going to see results in a short amount of time. So you sort of have to be willing to be in it for the long haul. Yeah, your organization has to be committed to doing it. And I say this because, as talking to all the people out there who might be thinking about doing this within their organization and running this type of program, there's going to be a lot of pressure for results in a very short time period, and that this is not the nature of this type of program. So just be prepared for that. The recruiting process usually takes a long time. The program itself can be 10, 12, 14 weeks, right? That's a long period of time. It could be multiple quarters before your business starts to see any real success or any measurable success from these programs. So you have to go into it knowing that it's going to take a long time. And I think if you set that stage going in and set the expectation that, look, we're not going to see a result until much farther in the future, you're going to have an easier time pushing it through and being able to talk to leaders about some of those metrics. So time is a really important thing, especially now, as we just have so little time anymore to get anything done. Thinking also about the transition from student to developer. So from a student perspective, right, they're in this program, they're in a safe learning environment, right? They can make mistakes. They've got peers that they're working with. They've got their instructor, they're learning. And then they graduate and they go sit at a desk and they start working, right, and contributing to a team. That's an abrupt change. And so having support for those students to make sure that they are successful in that transition is really important. Can we have mentors assigned to those folks as they enter their new roles? Are they working on paired programming projects? How quickly are you expecting them to do something on their own? Can they reach out to the instructor afterwards? Are we creating a cohort of students and a network where they can use their fellow students from the program to ask questions, right? So just thinking about how you're going to help those students transition into their jobs is important and can really make or break their success in the first few weeks on the job. So that's definitely a challenge. Something else that we've seen that isn't necessarily an impact to students or the program, but who owns the program, right? Who's making those ultimate decisions? There's a lot of stakeholders that are involved in this type of program. There's HR, there's talent, there's engineering. Sometimes there's other business partners that are involved. There has to be a designated owner who's ultimately responsible for making the final decision on the candidates, making the decisions around what the program is going to contain and what technologies and how it's going to be implemented. Knowing upfront who the actual owner is going to help with all those decisions and help everybody else support that program owner. So that's a really important thing to decide upfront as early as possible. And then finally, we don't like to talk about attrition. We don't like to lose people in the program, but it's going to happen, right? 10, 12, 14 weeks is a long time. Life happens. People change their mind. Things happen that are unavoidable. You're going to have people who at some point decide they can't continue and leave the program. So what are you going to do about that, right? What happens to students if they leave the program halfway through? Can they go back to their jobs? Do they have to find something different? How does the business react to that, right? There's a lot of question around what happens with those students, and knowing that going into it and being prepared for it, it's just going to help make that process easier. It's not easy for a student to say, I can't do this anymore. That's a hard decision too. So you want to make that as easy as possible. So, and you also don't want to impact the program. So you have to really think about some of those attrition rates, so that when it does happen, it's a smooth transition for everybody.
So I want to make sure, remind our audience that we will have a few minutes to answer questions. We've picked up a few as we've gone, but if you have any more that you'd like to, please just use that little Q&A button rather than the chat button, so that it comes up in my console here. And Jessica, before we do that, I guess, any other frequently asked questions about these types of programs that we haven't got to that you want to just make sure you talk about?
Yeah, I get a lot of people asking me, how is this going to impact my business? And it's an important question. It is, companies are investing in this, right? They're spending money to implement the programs. They're paying employees as they're going through the program and not getting output out of them. So it is an investment. And we've talked a lot today, I think, about some of the ways that businesses can benefit. But I think it's also really important to think about how it's going to impact your employees and your company culture, because it can have a really strong impact. With that insurance company, with their program, it has, really made employees across that organization feel proud to see their colleagues move from one role to another, right? And improve their career and completely change their career path. And that's a really empowering thing, right? It not only impacts the people who are going through that program, making them feel better about their, careers and where they're headed, but it also gives the people around them, faith in the organization to say, look, there's opportunity here. If I wanted to make a change, I know the organization would support me. So I think as a company, it can really impact how your employees view the organization, how they look at opportunity, and how they evaluate things that come their way. So I think the employee culture impact is a really strong one and something that should be considered as part of these programs.
What knowing that, like, depending on the role you're trying to bring people into, that there's a range of times, what are some of the averages? Maybe, like, just, are we talking these programs take 6 weeks? Do they take 6 months?
Mm-hmm.
What's the big kind of time picture?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of it depends on, again, the expectations of what you want them to do. I would say a pretty standard program where you are trying to develop someone from zero technical knowledge to sort of a junior front end developer, right? Somebody who's working on, a web application or something on the front end. I would say that's probably somewhere between, 10 and 14 weeks. You have to build the foundation of programming knowledge, right? You have to understand some of those fundamentals. And then they have to learn some of those technologies to be able to support that. And if you think about it, a lot of the developers who are on your team, they had 4 years of computer science college, or they've had quite a bit of time to go through those programs. So 10 to 14 weeks is not a huge amount of time. But I would say the shortest is probably 10 weeks. You can do it maybe in less, depending on, what the expectations are, but you want to make sure that you're really giving them a strong foundation so they can continue to learn as they move into those positions.
Well, and that is a great segue into this question. What are some of the most important aspects of the learning journey after graduation?
Yeah. So continuous learning, right? So in a lot of our programs, I think it's important to understand that you're not trying to create experts in these reskilling programs, right? You're not going to take someone from no technical ability to be a master coder, right? So that's not a realistic expectation. You're trying to create beginning foundation, right? You're trying to give them enough tools that they need to enter that job. And then through that program, they're going to generate curiosity. They're going to start learning more. They're going to start to understand where to go to build that knowledge. And as they enter their teams, they're going to learn how their teams are doing things. So as they start, taking on bits of features or user stories or bugs, and they come across something they don't know, naturally, they're going to go learn that technique, right? They're going to either ask a peer or they're going to go do some research. They're going to figure it out. So I think the most successful programs are the ones that give you enough of a jumping off point to then continue to learn as you move through. And then you're learning on the job, which is even more valuable.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, Jessica, that's all the questions we had. Thank you so much for laying this all out. It was really, really concise and I think pretty actionable. So I hope all of you enjoyed it. I want to thank you for joining us and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks.